Fixing the New Orleans Saints in 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. This is the 33rd team, so they go through and they have done every single team in the NFL. This is the New Orleans Saints. So we're going to go ahead and watch. Before we crank up the video, I'm going to answer the question for you. This is exactly how I would fix the New Orleans Saints. Exactly how I would do it. Now, this is just a plan. Definitely doesn't guarantee that they get fixed. A lot of teams sit in limbo for 10, 15, 20, 30 years and never do nothing. So some teams, on the other hand, can go have one off year and then boom, rattle off another decade of solid stuff. So it's all relative, but this is just how I would do it. This is what my plan would be. Now, I do have a cheat code because I do know what they're doing with Derek Carr. If you would have asked me this 2 weeks ago, I would have said, cut Carr, release Carr, take that money, do this. But we'll go ahead and pretend like I already know the Carr situation. So what I would do is long-term, aka 2.5 years, something like that, I would really focus on cleaning up the books. I would really focus on, all right, we got some bad contracts coming off the books in the next couple of years. Ryan Ramczyk, Derek Carr, Cam Jordan, Taysom Hill. We got all those players contractually coming off, all right? So I'd focus on that. I would take time to, if you're going to eat that, eat it all, right? Like in this next couple of years, however you can do it, because it might not make sense to just release them all at one time. It might make sense to restructure this deal, make this a post-June cut, make this, turn this into bonuses, whatever. Do whatever you got to do in the next couple of years to flesh out and get the cap under control. That's really a bad way of saying it. Get the cap under control is really just get rid of the bad contracts, get rid of the old contracts. Second thing I would do is kind of a sub like 1B. I would get younger. So the winning window, the players that we believed in and bought in and invested in, they are no longer as good as they once were. Obviously, players get older, players decline. So I would go ahead and as I'm offloading these contracts, I'm offloading those players as well. I'm getting younger. Again, the Tyrann Mathieu, the Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Taysom Hill, Derek Carr, all those players, I'm moving them towards the door. Okay. In the meantime, I'm nailing the draft. I'm doing everything I can. And I'm putting all the investment I can into really getting high-level impact players in the draft. I'm not looking for developmental players. I'm trying to get guys who I think are cornerstones, guys I think are high impact, guys I think can be all pro, the highest possible level. Simultaneously, I'm allowing Kellen Moore and Brandon Staley some time to get their systems in there, get their players in there. I'm not putting excess pressure on them to win the division or win 10 games or do this or you'll be fired. I'm giving them some years. I'm letting them grow into their positions. I'm letting them truly create an identity for this team, what they want this team to do. If those three things happen, then we're entering 2027, 2028, something like that, with a very young team, with all the bad contracts pretty much off of the books, and a couple of coaches who are now at that point, Kellen would be 40, Staley be 43, 44, who now have their team, have their culture, have their identity, and then they're ready to roll. That's how I would do it from a 1,000-foot view. Now, if you want to talk about how do you make the product on the field better, yeah, you got to figure out the defensive line. You got to figure out the quarterback position post Derek Carr. You got to get better playmakers. That's all obvious. That's the same thing for every team. So that's what I would do to fix the Saints. Take it away.
New Orleans Saints. What a time for the Saints. Kellen Moore coming in as the new head coach, Brandon Staley as defensive coordinator. And for the first time in a long time, well, one thing's familiar, one thing's unfamiliar. Here's the familiar part. As we head into the new league year, the Saints are last in cap space, and it's red, right? It's negative. They're a negative, a lot of negative cap space. But for the first time in a while, you're starting to see GM Mickey Loomis with an eye toward the future, right? Yeah. It made sense for a while when Drew Brees was your quarterback. You kept pushing the credit card, maxing that thing out and saying the bill will come due sometime close to 2030. But here we are, and I think it's a reset year for the New Orleans Saints. Also, for the first time, the
reset's a bad term. It's like it's an organic rebuild. It's not going to look like tear it all down, win 1, 2, 3 games. Like, that's just not how it is. So it's a rebuild to the extent that this front office is willing to like rebuild. But as far as tanking and stuff like that, that never happens.
The last time they drafted more than 7 times in a draft, more than the allotted 7, was 2015. And several of those drafts were 4 players, 5 players, a lot of just 7 players. For the first time, they actually have more than 7 draft picks. We
have 2 third-rounders.
Almost in about 10 years. So
7?
It's a different time, I think, for the Saints, and a good time for them. Right. Not to completely think about 2026. Maybe there's a little competitive rebuild here, but man, I hope most of their decisions are toward the future and not just trying to put a team together for 2025.
I mean, he nailed that one. Like, that's exactly how I see it going. I think your eye is to 2026, 2027. I think you are going to be relatively competitive just because of some of the players you still have, but I don't think they're going to they've told you enough, right? Like, they've told you with trading Marshawn Lattimore and getting Kellen Moore and getting Brandon Staley, and they even the restructuring that's going to happen with Carr, like, that's told you all you need to know of what they're going to do. And I think they are looking at this as a 2-year structural rebuild. Like, a metaphor I would use is they're rebuilding the house, but they're going to live in it while they're doing it. They can't tear everything down. They can't gut the house because they're still living in it. So they're going to renovate room by room, piece at a time. They're going to shift things around. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the exact same thing. You're going to get to where you want to go, which is this renovation of get the contracts out, get the players out, get new players in, free up the books.
Yeah, I mean, it's the time to reset. Like, you can kind of trace all of the cap woes kind of back to the last few years of Drew Brees and the realization or awareness within the building that, like, let's try and get Drew one more. This is our guy. This is one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game. Let's try and get one more championship while we have this guy, and then we'll deal with the future in the future. And they did that. They didn't get it done, but it was a fair enough approach, I think, to those things. But eventually you suffer the consequences of some of that.
Something else that I wanted to jump in here and show everybody is that a lot of people say, like, okay, we should have been doing this years ago. Like, the problem is, why didn't we reset or rebuild or whatever 2, 3, 4 years ago? We should have done this at the end of Breeze. We shouldn't have done this now. That part is wrong, and I'll show you why. All right, this is 2019, so this is Breeze's penultimate season. So Breeze plays one more year after this. All right, this is when we go 13-3, and then Breeze ends it with the 12-4 run where they lose to the Buccaneers. So in 2019, okay, you're 13-3. You are, depends on who you ask, but you are the best team in the NFL. That's where you're at right now. Like, you are a stud team. You are rocking and rolling. You're 13-3. You got Sean Payton. You've won the division again. Okay? So right here, no reason for a rebuild. Right here, you got Michael Thomas, Offensive Player of the Year at 26 years old. You've got a 24-year-old Alvin Kamara. You've got, on the other side of the ball, defensively, where's the defense? Defensively, Demario Davis is an all-pro first-team player at 30 years old. Michael Thomas is, we talked about him. Where's the defense? I'm trying to look at the defensive log here. I guess this is a mix of whoever recovered a fumble. But you've got, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's 22 years old. You have, you've just drafted Marcus Davenport. Now, obviously, that didn't pay off, but you got 25-year-old Von Bell. You got 23-year-old Marcus Williams. You've got, we're not going to talk about Eli Apple, but you've got, obviously, Cam Jordan still there. He's 30 years old. You got Pro Bowlers in Marshawn Lattimore, who's 23 years old. I mean, right here, you're thinking like things are okay. All right, so then you go the next year. Okay, Breeze's last year. You're 12-5 or 12-4. We know how it all plays out. But again, you've got 24-year-old Kamara. You've got your 27-year-old Michael Thomas. Now, Michael Thomas was injured, but he's coming off of an Offensive Player of the Year. You still think you've got something insane in Michael Thomas. Why wouldn't you think that, right? And then defensively, we talk about the players. You still have Pro Bowlers in Cam Jordan, Pro Bowler in Marshawn Lattimore. Pro Bowler. You got Andres Pete on the line. Pro Bowler in Demario Davis, who is still playing at a super high level. He's 31 years old. You have Trey Hendrickson. You got some stuff going on. All right. So now Breeze retires, but you still have Sean Payton. So you're still thinking, well, it's not time for a full rebuild yet. We still have these players. We still have Michael Thomas. We still have Alvin Kamara. We still have Mark Ingram. We still have Taysom Hill. We still have the defensive players. We have 22-year-old Paulson Adebo. Demario Davis is older, but still playing at an all-pro level. We still have Pro Bowlers in Cam Jordan and Marshawn Lattimore. Marcus Williams is still there. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is still there. You still have these players. Now you have a 22-year-old Pete Werner. Then Peyton leaves. All right. Now this is where things get ugly. Peyton leaves. Breeze is left. You're coming off of the 13-3. You're coming off of the 12 win. You were 9-8 the year before, but there were some injuries, but you still had that group of players. This is why you couldn't hit the reset. Because the way it fell, now you're in 2022. You've already invested in these players. You've already invested in Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill, Michael Thomas. You've already invested in Cam Jordan and Demario Davis. You've invested in Marshawn Lattimore. You've invested in all these players. And why wouldn't you? Right? Like, you're only 2 years away from this team being the best team in the NFL. You're only a year away from Sean Payton being there. So then we have 2022, okay? 2023 happens, and then we start to blow it up. Then we start to truly reset. 2024, you fire Dennis Allen. The year before, you'd fire Pete Carmichael. You trade Marshawn Lattimore, and now we're setting up to where you're going to offload Taysom Hill, Cam Jordan. All these players are out the door. All right, you got rid of Michael Thomas. So it seems like a long time, but really, they're only probably a year. You could argue, but this is where you get Derek Carr. So it's hard to say like this is the year. Hindsight being 2020, this is the year where you don't get Carr and you reset. If you really were seeing things clear, if your third eye was wide open, this is the year where you say, you know what, I can see the future. This is the time to offload. Unfortunately, no one can see the future. So unfortunately, they went and got Derek Carr and said, well, we still have some of these players. We still believe in this. We still believe in the Camaras and the Olaves and the Michael Thomas even. And we still believe in Cam Jordan and Demario Davis and Carl Granderson and whatever. So this is the year. But really, like, the rebuild couldn't have happened that much sooner. You're not rebuilding here. You're not rebuilding a year after 12-4 and winning the division with Sean Payton. And then, they just decide, well, we'll give Dennis a year.
Just go as far as they could with Derek Carr as a quarterback. It's like, that's good enough to maybe win you a division. Actually, it turns out it wasn't because it took them too long to get going. And then last year you dealt with a ton of injuries as well. It just wasn't going to work out. So now you're basically full reset. You've gone a different direction. You're bringing in a new head coach. Brandon Staley, I think, is actually a really intriguing retread as a defensive coordinator. I mean, the last time we saw him just focusing on one side of the ball, he was running the number one defense in the game, albeit with Aaron Donald. But running a scheme that's still like at the cutting edge. I mean, Vic Fangio's defense is the same shell, effectively the same family tree. That just wrecked the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl. I mean, that was running the number one defense in the league this year. So I think it's entirely plausible that Staley could get that group cooking if they get him some personnel. But now you've got this is a team that could really use having a good draft now.
Yes. I mean, that's it. I mean, they need to draft better. They did have this stretch. I think if you looked at their drafts from like 2010 through 20 or 21 or whatever, they may have been the best drafting team in the NFL as far as just hit rates and finding the best players. That's kind of.
Let's take a look. So this is it. So you got to remember, like, the Saints are going through, and if you go through, so let's go to like 20, let's go to the 7-9 stretch. So the Saints go 7-9 3 seasons in a row with peak Drew Brees and peak Sean Payton. This is when the Spagnolia defenses were just a disaster. This is when all this is happening, okay? So, or right after all that happened. So, they go 7-9. Then they turn it around. If you go to the draft classes, you can see where 2015, 2016, they go nuts. Okay, this is where, like, look at these players. 2017 is absolutely insane. Marshawn Lattimore, Ryan Ramczyk, Marcus Williams, Alvin Kamara in the 3rd, Alex Anzalone in the 3rd, Trey Hendrickson in the 3rd. Crazy, okay? But look all around that. In 2019, Eric McCoy in the 2nd, CJ Gardner-Johnson in the 4th. All right, you go 2016, Sheldon Rankins, Michael Thomas, Von Bell, Andres Pete in 2015. You keep going. 2020, Cesar Ruiz, Zach Bond in the 3rd. Again, Pete Werner, Paulson Adebo in the 3rd, Pete Werner in the 2nd. 2022, Chris Olave, Trevor Penning, book still out. He turned a corner, maybe, possibly. Alontae Taylor in the 2nd. So this is a team that has proven they can draft. They can find players. I mean, even if you go all the way down to 2010, 2011, Jimmy Graham in the 3rd. You got Cam Jordan, Mark Ingram. Yeah, I mean, Kenny Vaccaro, blast from the past there. Teron Armstead. Brandon Cook's crazy player. He's a guy who never really had a peak. Like, he's never had a big-time peak in his career, but he's just been good forever. I mean, he's had a long career, multiple teams, multiple stops, and he's been good for multiple teams. But never, like I say, never peaked. Just good at times for different teams.
It tapered off a little bit these last couple of years, and then it coincides with not drafting often, right? Having those drafts where there's only 4 players coming in or 5 players coming in. So we talk a lot about rebuilding years and everything. Like, I think you can do the competitive rebuild deal here, because when they brought Derek Carr in, I was fine with that. You're talking about a weak NFC South. And so, Derek Carr or Kirk Cousins coming in as a starting quarterback in the NFC South feels better than adding them to, say, the AFC North, right? When you have to compete with the Ravens, the Bengals, and teams that have, clear superior talent at quarterback. So I think the Saints, like, if Carr was playing pretty well last year and, he can go on those runs and those stretches, like, they might stay competitive. I just want the rest of those decisions to be, let's build through the draft. Let's not make, crazy decisions in free agency, and let's build to the future. I think you can almost do both. And the Saints might actually, again, if they keep Carr and don't move on from him, set up in this competitive rebuild world.
I mean, Steve is like, I'm starting to think he might be watching some of my videos. He is saying exactly what my argument has been with, you can keep Carr and be competitive, and who cares? You're paying him anyways, right? Like, the cap hit is the cap hit. You've already signed him. You've already done all that. So you can keep him in place, be relatively competitive, but as long as the other decisions, the actual decision points, because you could argue the Carr thing wasn't even a decision, right? As long as the other decision points are getting younger, clearing the cap, clearing some contracts, then that's all fine. Like, if Carr's in place, couldn't move off of him, couldn't get out of the contract, but you get off of the Taysom Hill contract, you get off the Ryan Ramczyk contract, you get off the Cam Jordan contract, you build through the draft, you have a good draft. If all that happens simultaneously, then we're in a really good spot where we're rebuilding, but we're also maintaining some competitive balance.
I would set that part up with drafting another quarterback, right? So they drafted Spencer Rattler last year. Love it, right? Take shots on Spencer Rattler. Got him in the
If he says Kyle McCord, he's absolutely been watching my videos.
5th, way later than people expected. Draft another one of these, the 3rd, 4th, 5th QB off the board, whoever it is. Draft another one to hopefully stumble in to the heir apparent while you still have Derek Carr on the roster.
Yeah, well, that would be my question first and foremost. If we are fixing the Saints, is there any purpose to keeping Derek Carr other than he does make you a lot more competitive than Spencer Rattler does as your quarterback? Like, to me, Derek Carr is emblematic of the cap trouble that we need to fix on the roster. Like, if we're doing this properly and rebuilding, we need to clear that contract off the books. And to be honest, I mean, they can for a ton of space if they cut him with a post June 1st designation. It's a lot more painful if they cut him with and I don't even know if they can do that because of how far over the cap they are. But like,
see, like that's the thing. The cap thing, like at a certain point, like 1 + 1 = 2. Like you can only do what you can do. If the cap didn't work out by cutting him, which we have to assume it did not, then it's kind of a moot point. Because the whole should they cut him, should they not cut him, the only reason that's an argument or even a conversation is the idea that they financially could. If I was told, which we basically were, that it doesn't make sense financially to cut him, we can't do that. The post June 1st, you don't get the money in time, you're not cap compliant in time, so then you have to do another move. If you're told all that stuff, then it's like, okay, well, I understand. If you're doing the math and you have it all figured out. Like, look, very similar to Denver with Russell Wilson. They held on to Russell Wilson an extra year when Sean Payton was there and then offloaded him. They restructured his deal, pushed it a couple of years into the future. They're paying him, I think they'll be paying him 2 years, maybe 3 years after he was off the team. That's just how it worked out. And that's how it made sense for them. It is what it is. Like this is a very complex, huge financial questions. So you have to assume that the teams who are doing this, they've done the math, and that's just how it's going to work out. So the Carr thing, yeah, it sounds good. Like, cut him, take the $30 million, do this, and this. But then you hear, oh, well, actually, you won't get the money in time. Okay, well, that makes sense.
Like, if we're fixing this, and we're getting rid of that contract.
Most of the cap savings would be next year, but there's a lot of dead money attached to Derek Carr. That's why I'm saying I'd almost rather just keep him. And kind of like remember when Bryce Young got benched and you said, hey, I can't even evaluate the rest of the Panthers roster because the QB play is so bad. Like, Derek Carr helps you evaluate the rest of your roster, but you just let him be the guy that's under center while you're, bringing in all the youth movement.
He does, but he also chews up $51 million of your cap this year if you keep him around.
No, I get it. I understand.
But see, like, the argument is the cap thing. But if you are told that is no longer an option, then it's not a discussion, right? Like, if you're told it doesn't actually financially fix anything, then you have to keep them.
I'm not in, like, tank mode, though, for the Saints. Like, I don't know if that's the best way to go, because that would be suggesting, it's getting out of, cap hell, but are you going to roll with Rattler as the starter, or are you just going to draft someone else? Or are you going to go Daniel Jones? I mean, are you going to go bridge quarterback somewhere? Like Justin Fields is going to come in at $5 million?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm getting rid of Derek Carr, I'm definitely looking around for a bridge or something to compete with Spencer Rattler, because I don't think you can go into the season saying Spencer Rattler's our guy based off what we saw from him last season. And which is unfortunate for him, because like Sam Howell kind of ruined that as a possibility for low round drafted quarterbacks for a long time. I think those guys do not get more than a look. If you get a chance in the NFL, you either are a Dak Prescott, where like basically immediately the second you get in the building, like the second you get in the building, everyone's like, oh, this guy's actually, we missed. He's just way better than everyone thought he was.
I think Rattler's close. I think if Rattler would, I'm very interested to know what the conversation would be if Rattler would have won against Washington. If he just had a win, especially against a team like Washington, if he just had that win, I feel like it would be a very different discourse. Rattler was a win or two away from, I think, really getting a serious look at this.
So you're either that guy, or you get like a look because the situation's not good. A guy gets hurt and you end up getting a few games to start. If you don't look good in those few games, like unquestionably good, there's no way they're gonna gamble that you're gonna be better next year. Like, and the Washington did with Sam Howell. They're like, this guy looked pretty good. Let's give him a shot for a year. And it wasn't good. So that's like never happening again for a long period of time. I think, Spencer Rattler for a year would be interesting to watch, but I don't think there's any shot of that happening. So if you're not doing that, you got to go find a bridge, whether it's, Daniel Jones is not a bad.
It especially doesn't happen in the situation the Saints are in, where Kellen Moore didn't draft Spencer Rattler. So like all that goodwill that Spencer Rattler may have won, like Kellen Moore's not in the building. You know, like you have a new boss. So Kellen Moore has no loyalty or allegiance or, hey, let's see this play out. I had a vision for this guy when I drafted him. Let's see it play out. Kellen, that doesn't exist, which hurts Rattler big time.
Bad shout. But something like that, and then draft a guy too, and now your QB room is Spencer Rattler, Daniel Jones / alternative bridge quarterback, and a rookie of some description.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I
don't hate that play.
I don't think we're winning a Super Bowl with Derek Carr or
hell no. The Daniel Jones or whoever, that's very similar to what the Bucs did with Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask, where you bring in Daniel Jones to compete with Rattler. You're totally fine with going with Rattler, but if Jones beats him out, go with Jones. So if we were in a bizarro world where it would have made sense to cut Derek Carr and we ended up going this direction, that would have been great, no doubt about it.
Or Daniel Jones. You made a face. You made a face.
I mean, it's just a bold call.
Most important for me is maximizing all these draft picks. So that's where
100%.
That's where my focus is going to be. I'm going to spend at least one on a QB. You got pick 9. Another team that could use help in the trenches. I mean, right tackle. You know, they drafted Talise Fawanga in the first round last year, moved him to left tackle. Right tackle's Trevor Penning. So you can draft another tackle if you need to. Tackle the guard. You've been playing this game where if Will Campbell or Kelvin Banks is there, they could be a guard first, maybe a tackle.
Yep. So I have been preaching Will Campbell. You can move him in. You turn him into a guard if you're concerned about his length. He's an absolute mauler. I think he'd be fantastic there. So, yeah, I mean, that's definitely an option if you want to go that route.
Tackle, they could be both. They're probably in the market for that, and they're in the market for all of those freak edge rushers that are going to be available in the first round.
And also
as
a
quarterback option, by the way, you do also have the player that Skip Bayless believes is better than Dak Prescott available this free agent period. You know,
so Cooper Rush can win the NFC South. What's his career record? He's got a better career record than Derek Carr. Win-loss record, I bet.
I mean, the data speaks for itself.
Somebody fact check me on that.
I mean, I can't imagine Cooper Rush getting too many W's. I know he went like 4-0 one of the years he replaced Dak. So maybe.
Harry, can you fact check me on Cooper Rush's record? All right. What else do we want to do draft wise? I mean, it's just draft the best players available, man. They've got the corner need as well. I think there's corners to be had maybe in the second round with Paulson Adebo coming off the bad injury and heading to free agency. Defensive line starters and depth needed in part because they've missed, man. They've missed on Brian. Look, I know Brian Brzee has a lot of sacks. He still struggles against the run. Doesn't create consistent pressure like some others. Maybe he'll get better, but
Brzee, he is split. So if you're just casually watching the games, you may think like Brzee had a great year last year, but the analytics, the stat heads, ugly for Brzee. So I'm torn on him, because first place I go to is obviously the data. Data does not look good for Brzee, but at times he did show flashes, so maybe he can progress and get better, but he's got a long way to go.
Brzee, Isaiah Foskey, some of those other high-round draft picks, like they got to go back to that well on the defensive line.
That defensive line, I think, needs a real significant amount of work to it. You've got, Carl Granderson is a good player. Cameron Jordan is still going, but has declined hugely from the point where he was a real impact defensive lineman.
Yeah.
So, you've got, at this point, Granderson's the only player out there that's consistently moving the needle in a positive direction. Brzee makes some plays, but he also makes a ton of plays on the negative side. Yeah. Cameron Jordan just isn't the player that he used to be. All the other guys, Colin Saunders has made some plays, including that interception. But again, it's not like an impact defensive lineman. Chase Young, who did some solid work last year, but is a free agent. Peyton Turner never worked out. Isaiah Foskey hasn't done it yet. There's Nathan Shepard was a letdown throughout his career. This is not a good group. And they really can throw bodies at it both in free agency and the draft if they can find them.
Yeah, so that's definitely one of my first orders of business here is reshaping the defensive line. Then you got to look at receiver, right? Chris Olave, he's dealt with all those concussions, but he's the best option, obviously. And Rashid Shaheed is, the best wide receiver in the NFL when he's healthy. We all know that. But yeah, they could use another dependable pass catcher there as well. So I think that second, third tier of.
I think they're like the wide receivers. And get some decent wide receivers late in the draft. You can come out of this with a couple of wide receivers that you take in the third, fourth, fifth, sixth round, and you're like, man, these guys are okay. Like we're rocking and rolling here. So I know McMillan is going to be on a lot of people's mind with the 9th pick, but if you told me, you ended up with the Trey Harris of the worlds or the Quintez Johnsons of the world and the Savion Williams of the world and Jack Becks of the world, like, okay, I can live with that.
Of wide receivers, there's probably pluck one of those guys, at least in this draft.
Yeah, I mean, I think their first round pick almost has to go on the defensive line.
I really hope Quintez Johnson's his name. The wide receiver from Oregon. I think that's his name. I'm not going to check it. I'm not going to edit it. I hope I got that one right.
The Olave thing makes that a very difficult sort of position group to evaluate for them because, yeah, he's dealt with multiple concussions now that have kept him out for a significant period of time. Is that something that when we were at the Super Bowl, we went on this sort of medical tour of the building with Dr. Alan Sills, the NFL's kind of chief medical guy. And they were talking about the procedures and the concussion stuff and what the whole setup was at the Super Bowl. Like, one of the things I think that's difficult to figure out is an NFL offseason enough to kind of fully reset players that have had issues with concussions? Because a difference between the NFL and a lot of other sports is the downtime in football is a lot longer. A guy like you talked about Jaquan Brisker for the Bears or Chris Olave, or obviously Tua was the biggest example of quarterback, but like these guys, you can deal with multiple concussions within a season that can suddenly start to go, this is keeping him out for a lot longer than we expected. But in a sport like rugby, you're constantly going. Like the season is most of the year. And you have to manufacture a break. You have to say, no, we're like shutting you down for the rest of the season. Whereas in the NFL, once you reach the offseason, particularly if you didn't make the playoffs, you get to January and now you don't need to be going again until August, right? Like that's 6-7 months of downtime where you don't have to, expose your brain to those kind of hits. Is that enough to like reset a guy like Olave and say, okay, concussions are in the past now. We just had a rough season of this. Or is this going to be a lingering problem for him? And now he falls under the category of guys that you love when he's on the field.
I just don't think you ever know with concussions. Like Tua, same thing with Tua. Like when people were talking about, well, maybe he should be forced to retire. It's like, how do you know though? How do you know if he will ever have a concussion again in his career? It's just such until we know. One thing, this is a completely different subject, but what I don't understand is once you have a certain amount of concussions, I think the NFL should say you have to wear the Guardian cap. Like once you get to this number, no questions asked, you have to wear the cap. So, the fact that the Guardian cap is a thing is voluntary, but like I just feel like that should get used more or utilized more for players who have repeating concussions like Tua or Chris Olave.
But you can't rely on because he's got an extensive concussion history.
I'm thinking it's probably a concern. It's a concern. Like I'd love to pair someone with him, but I think you have to
like how
think about depth even more because of that at receiver. So I think drafting a couple receivers makes a lot of sense here for the Saints. So
yeah, especially with extra
defensive line, couple receivers, offensive line, they need it all. 9 draft picks, first time since 2015 with more than 7. So different. It should.
Yeah, I was right. That's where the 8-9 pick are, 3rd round, 7th.
Hopefully they're not trading up like they used to. Like change your ways, Saints. Right. If I'm running the show here, I might turn 9 into 12. You know me, we'll turn it into 12 picks, and it's going to be one of the youngest rosters in the NFL next year, completely changing this whole thing.
Exactly what I've been saying. The Saints are on that track of being one of the youngest rosters in the NFL within the next 2 years. So stay on that track. Keep doing that. Good stuff. I mean, they basically echoed a lot of what we've been saying here. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you think, and I will see you in the next video.